On the first Friday in April, we hooked up the Scamp and headed out for our first camping trip of the season. This was the first weekend that the New Jersey state parks were reopening their campgrounds, and we couldn't wait to get out. So we jumped on the opportunity and headed out for a quick weekend trip to a state park in the western side of southern New Jersey, just to reacclimate ourselves with camping. We were right outside of Vineland. It's alright, right? Yeah. Not a ton of room, but it'll work. Release the Redford. Okay. Oh. Go forward like an inch. We put a leveling block under the right tire. Right there. Good. I checked the level inside the door. Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah. I chalked the tires. And then we released the Redford. Oh God. One of our new things for this trip are the pillows. We got these wedge-shaped pillows, so we can kind of sit against the wall, and then they have these like nice neck rolls with them. So pretty excited to try that, so we can sit up on the side of the Scamp and kind of use it like a day bed. This weekend is the first weekend that the state parks are actually open in New Jersey, and surprisingly the campground is pretty full, almost full, and we were kind of surprised because, you know, it's spring right now, it's April, but it was 25 degrees last night, and tonight is going to be 25 degrees again, so really cold. The water that we had outside froze, and we had the heat on last night. I think I was a little bit early in taking the Reflectex down, because you kind of think like, oh, it's spring, it's going to be warm, but this trip is actually considerably colder than the trip that we took in December for Christmas. So it's like in the Northeast, spring is not really a thing. It kind of just goes from like winter to summer in about a week. So we're still waiting for that. So the good news is the sun is out. We actually have a decently sunny spot, so that's charging the battery so that we can use the heat again tonight, because we're going to need it. Oh man.
25 again.
25, yeah. So much for spring. And then it's going to be like 80 next week.
Yeah, it's going to.
So strange.
Summer will be upon us soon.
But the original plan for this weekend was that we were going to go backpacking, and that fell through because they didn't open the backcountry sites yet. And now I'm kind of glad, because
yeah, worked out.
This would be a little bit miserable if we were tent camping and backpacking. So, all right, let's take this dog for a walk. Ready, Red?
Put the puppy on though.
Yeah, layer up. Even though it was still pretty cold out, we were starting to see some of the signs of spring coming. As we walked around Thundergust Lake, we found ourselves once again looking at the work of the Civilian Conservation Corps. At the end of the lake, there's a dam that regulates the water level in the lake. And then we continued around to the White Bridge, which had a plaque that described the hours of work and the materials that went into building this bridge and many other structures around the property. Parvin actually served as the home base for the CCC in that area from 1933 to 1941. In 1944, the area was also used as a POW camp for German prisoners. Dog. You're allowed now, it's okay. They changed their mind. We headed back to the campsite at the Jaggers Point campground. We figured we would start the fire a little bit early today. We wanted to try to cook dinner over the fire. It was still kind of cold, and Redford was getting tired. He's just not used to all this walking yet, so we let him go into the Jeep and take a nap the way that he likes to. First, we got started with making some coffee, of course, and then I used the Hilo shower to do some of the dishes. This is a great way to use the camper even though the water system is still winterized. One of the things that we noticed about this campground is the water has a very strong iron flavor, which is a common thing in South Jersey. We have high iron content to the water, so everything had to go through the Brita filter. We haven't started using our Berkey filter when we're out, but we think we might try to find a spot to keep it in the camper because the water was so strong we couldn't stand it unless it had been filtered, and then you could still taste it a little bit. So the Berkey might be going with us in the future. Despite the fact that the weather was so cold, the campground was still pretty much full, and let's just say it was not exactly the most quiet and relaxing camping weekend that we've ever had. When the fire was looking pretty good, we threw some chicken sausage onto the cast iron skillet and let that cook over the fire. And then I put a pot of water on to do some ramen noodles, and we had a bunch of spinach and vegetables to throw into that. So a good official start to the camping season when we've had ramen noodles. Here's our ramen noodles with chicken sausage, a whole bunch of spinach, and some herb cheese cooked over the fire. And there's a very tired Redford, all worn out. It seemed to us that there were a lot of new campers in the campground, a lot of very new looking RVs, and of course we know that RV sales have been really strong lately because camping is one of the best things that we can do right now. But I talked to a couple people after this weekend, and one of the people we knew with a brand new RV didn't realize that it wasn't a good time to unwinterize their water system, and their pipes ended up freezing. So it's important to keep an eye on the weather, even in the spring. For us, we are used to tent camping, so we have a lot of skills that we rely on, that it's not a big deal for us to use the RV even when the water system is still winterized, because we just use our old tent camping skills and they serve us really well in that situation. Luckily, as it got dark, the campground did quiet down a bit, so we were able to enjoy the sound of the spring peepers. We got our first trip of the season in, and I feel like it's always a process of like shaking off the rust and kind of like getting back into the swing of things with everything with the RV, like setting it up. You have to think a little bit harder about what you're supposed to do and the sequence of it, and just getting used to like sleeping when there's more noises in the campground or like the heater turning on. The first night I woke up a bunch of times, and then the second night I slept much better, although this guy hogging the bed. So I think a big part of it too is just getting Red used to being in the campground. He has been a lot more antsy on this trip than he was last year. Like last year he was getting so relaxed with just the sounds and like people walking by and all of that. And now he's finally actually being still for 2 seconds, but he's been very, very high energy this whole trip. Part of what we were actually doing too is over the winter he hurt his, I think it was his back right leg. He was limping for a couple weeks, and we took him to the vet. He had to get a cortisone injection, and they thought he might have a partial tear of his ACL, which normally would mean surgery, which we definitely want to try to avoid. So he got the injection, he had to take anti-inflammatories for a few days, and then we had to significantly limit his activity level, which is very hard with him. He's a high energy dog, so we couldn't like take him to the park and let him sprint like he usually does. We have to be really careful with that kind of stuff because that's exactly what will aggravate his leg. So he's doing great right now. No limping, walking normally. We did like halfway around the lake and back yesterday, and his leg is doing great. We just have to be super careful about very slowly increasing his activity level so we don't aggravate it again. So he is having a very hard time with that because he loves to run. He doesn't understand why we're not letting him sprint. So that's been a challenge. But I think as we do a couple more trips and kind of get our RV legs back, and hopefully he gets his RV legs back and gets used to camping again, it'll be easier. But this was a good like introduction to the camping season. Then we started to pack up the Scamp to get ready to go home. Okay. We closed up all the windows, pulled forward to get the leveling block out. This is when you want to pay extra close attention, especially early in the season. Double check that the door is locked and all the windows and hatches are closed. Make sure you got everything off the ground, and it's good if you both do a full walk around so that if one person forgets something, the other person will usually pick up on it. Thank you for joining us on our first trip of this season, and a big thank you to our patrons for supporting our efforts to share our travels with you. Our next trip that we have planned is taking the Scamp up to Lancaster in Pennsylvania to see the Amish farms in the spring.
Well, you worried about you and me, the injustice, the next president to be, the news and what you hear, your career. It's time for you to face those fears, and it's all fair to be aware, and I'll be there, so don't be scared. Just take a deep breath of air, and 1, 2, 3 to 10, you begin to focus again, and though time flies, we have enough to realize this bigger than the both of us.